A single act of kindness at a diner would not only change the life of a disabled boy, but also teach a billionaire the true meaning of love, empathy, and family. The story of the billionaire father did not begin with glory, though most people around him believed that his life was perfect. On the outside, he seemed like the man who had everything: mansions, private jets, expensive cars, endless wealth, and the kind of reputation that made people either admire him or envy him. But behind those polished walls of luxury, there was a truth he never revealed to the world. His life was not defined only by boardrooms and business deals. It was also marked by an ache in his heart that never left him, not even for a single day. That ache was his son. From the day his son was born, he knew life would not be simple. The doctors had spoken softly in the hospital, carefully choosing their words. They explained that the boy had been born with a condition that would affect his body and ability to move independently. They reassured him that it was not the end of the world, that many children grew up with challenges and still found ways to live meaningful lives. But those words had barely touched him. He was not ready for that kind of truth. He was a man used to power, used to solving problems with money, with decisions, with influence. But here was something that none of his billions could fix at first. He did what he thought was best. He hired the finest doctors, spent fortunes on treatments, therapists, and specialists from around the globe. Every time someone suggested a new method, a new machine, or a promising cure, he paid without hesitation. His hope was desperate but genuine. Maybe one day his son would walk, talk, and live as other children did. Hope, writing blank checks and moving mountains in search of miracles. But reality has a way of humbling even the strongest. The boy grew, but his condition remained. He learned to smile, to express himself with his eyes and with small sounds, but his body was fragile. The father, though always present in terms of money, began to distance himself in spirit. He could not bear to see his son's limitations. It hurt him deeply, in ways he did not want to admit. He felt guilty for even thinking of it, but every time he looked at his boy, he was reminded of what he could not control. Control had always been the foundation of his life, so he buried himself in work. If he was not at home, he did not have to confront those feelings of helplessness. He told himself he was working for his son's future, building an empire that would provide for him long after he was gone. He told himself that love could be measured in security, in comfort, in ensuring that his son would never lack a thing. The mansions, the private nurses, the expensive medical equipment, all of it was his way of saying, "I care." But deep down, he knew it was also his way of running away. The boy, however, was not blind to this distance. Even in his limited ways, he could feel when his father's presence was missing, when his arms were replaced by those of caretakers, when his eyes searched for his father but only met with the shadows of empty rooms. Children, no matter their condition, understand love in ways adults often forget. And he understood that his father loved him, but struggled to show it, in quiet moments. When the billionaire sat alone in his massive house, he thought about these things. He remembered the first time he had held his son, tiny and fragile, in his arms, and how his heart had swelled with a promise to protect him at all costs. He remembered the nights he had stayed awake beside his hospital bed, praying silently, bargaining with the universe to give his boy a chance at a normal life. And yet those memories were mixed with his own weakness, his tendency to withdraw, to bury his pain under endless work because it was easier to face angry shareholders than to face his own emotions. People around him never guessed the truth. They saw only his polished image, the successful man who had climbed from nothing to become one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. Magazines put him on their covers, calling him a visionary, a genius, a leader. Ever spoke of the father who felt powerless in his own home? None of them told the story of the man who would have given up all his wealth in exchange for his son's health. And there was another truth that haunted him. He feared his son might grow up believing that his father did not love him enough, that he had been too busy making money to show tenderness. That fear gnawed at him quietly, though he rarely admitted it, even to himself. Despite his struggles, he did love his son. He noticed every small victory, the way his boy's eyes lit up at certain sounds, the way he tried to communicate even without words, the joy he showed when watching the world outside his window. Sometimes the father stood in the doorway, watching. Silently, almost afraid to break the fragile magic of those moments. He wanted to go in, to sit by his side, to hold him, but something always held him back. It was not pride, but rather fear, fear of breaking down, fear of facing his own vulnerability. As years passed, the father built walls around himself. To the world, he was untouchable, a man who had mastered everything. But inside, he was a father who felt like a failure. And yet he never stopped trying in his own way. He made sure his son had the best life money could buy, gardens to look at, music to listen to, nurses who were kind and patient. But what the boy needed most was something money could never provide: his father's time, his father's touch, his father's willingness to simply be there. There were rare days when the father let his guard down. On those days he would sit beside his son, take his hand gently, and whisper stories. Sometimes he spoke of the world outside, sometimes of dreams he once had, sometimes of nothing at all, just words to fill the silence. The boy listened, eyes wide, and those moments, though fleeting, were the closest they ever came to a true bond. And each time, when the father left the room, his heart ached with the knowledge that he should do more, he should be more. He carried this burden quietly, never sharing it even with his closest friends or colleagues. For men like him, vulnerability was a weakness, and he had spent his life proving he was strong. But late at night, when the house was quiet, he often sat alone in his study, staring at the glow of city lights from his window, wondering if he had failed the most important role of his life, not as a businessman, but as a father. In those nights of silence, he sometimes imagined what life would have been like if his son had been born without disabilities. He imagined playing catch in the yard, teaching him to swim, taking him on adventures, showing him the world. And then he would stop himself, ashamed of the thought. His son was not a what-if. His son was real, alive, and deserving of love, just as he was. Yet the longing never fully disappeared. The father's story in those early years was one of contradiction. He loved his son deeply, yet he kept his distance. He wanted to give him everything, yet he failed to give the one thing that mattered most: his presence. His heart was heavy, but his pride was heavier. And so, day after day, he continued his routine, working, providing, pretending he was doing enough, until the day came when life, in its quiet and unexpected way, placed someone in their path who would show him what true love and care really meant. The evening had been long, and the billionaire father felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. He had been traveling for hours, his schedule filled with endless meetings and calls, the usual grind that consumed most of his days. His son was with him, resting quietly in the back seat of the car, his fragile body supported by cushions. The boy's eyes wandered as the car moved through the unfamiliar town, taking in the lights, the shops, and the streets filled with strangers. The father glanced at him occasionally, noticing the small flickers of curiosity on his face. There was a hunger in those eyes, a desire to see and feel life. Beyond the walls of their mansion or the rooms of hospitals, the driver pulled over at a small diner along the road. It wasn't the kind of place the billionaire usually stopped at. He was used to 5-star restaurants, private dining rooms, and gourmet meals served on polished plates. But tonight was different. The town was small, and this diner was the only place open. Besides, his son seemed restless, and the billionaire thought a break might do them both good. He stepped out first, adjusting his jacket, and then turned to help his son. The boy tried to move, but his limbs were weak, his body refusing to cooperate. The father sighed, his heart aching, but his movements were clumsy. He bent down to lift his son, but something about the moment froze him. He hesitated, unsure, almost afraid of the looks people might give him inside the diner. For a man who carried entire corporations on his shoulders, this simple act of lifting his boy felt heavier than all of it combined. Just then, before he could gather himself, someone appeared from the diner door. It was a waitress, carrying a small tray in her hand. She had noticed them from inside the expensive car, the well-dressed man, and the boy struggling. She walked quickly toward them, her apron slightly stained from work, her hair tied back. loosely, her shoes worn from long shifts. She put the tray down on a counter near the entrance, and without hesitation, bent down beside the boy. "Would you like some help?" she asked softly, her voice warm and kind, not pitying. The billionaire opened his mouth to refuse. He was not used to strangers stepping into his life, not used to accepting help, especially from someone he assumed came from a very different world than his own. But before he could speak, the waitress had already acted. She leaned closer, carefully, sliding one arm under the boy's shoulders and another under his knees. With surprising strength and even more surprising tenderness, she lifted him. The boy's eyes widened. For a moment, he seemed unsure, but then he relaxed against her, sensing her genuine care. The billionaire stood frozen, watching. He could not remember the last time he had seen someone hold his son with such natural ease, as though the boy was not a burden but a gift to be carried. Inside the diner, heads turned, but not in the way the father feared. People looked, yes, but they smiled. They noticed the waitress's gentle touch, the way she spoke to the boy as she carried him in. "There we go, sweetheart. You'll be fine. Let's get you comfortable." Her tone was the same she might have used for her own child, filled with love and patience. She placed the boy carefully in a booth near the window, arranging cushions so he could sit upright and see outside. She adjusted his position, brushed his hair gently from his forehead, and smiled at him as though he were the most important guest in the diner. The boy responded with a soft laugh, his eyes bright, his body relaxing as though he had known her. Forever, the father walked in behind them, his footsteps slower than usual. He was used to commanding every room he entered, but here, for the first time in a long while, he felt small. He watched this woman, this ordinary waitress, do something extraordinary without even realizing it. She treated his son not with the cautious distance many people showed, nor with the uncomfortable pity he often noticed, but with pure, unfiltered kindness. She handed the boy a small menu, though she knew he could not read it fully. Still, she spoke to him, pointing at pictures, explaining each dish as if it were an adventure. "This one's pancakes, soft and fluffy. This one's a burger, very tasty. And here's mac and cheese, my personal favorite." The boy looked at her, his eyes sparkling, and made small sounds of approval. She laughed and clapped her hands lightly, as though his response had made her entire day brighter. The billionaire sat across from his son, still quiet, still watching. Something stirred in him, something he could not put into words. For years, he had surrounded his boy with professionals, nurses, therapists, specialists, people who were paid to care. They were skilled, yes, but there was always a formality in their touch, a boundary in their interactions. What he was seeing now was different. This waitress had no reason to care, no contract, no paycheck waiting at the end of the day for holding his son in her arms. Yet she had done it with more grace than anyone he could remember. She returned with water and placed a straw carefully in front of the boy. "There you go, nice and easy." She guided his hand to hold the cup, steadying it when his grip faltered. The boy's smile widened when he took a sip. She celebrated it as though he had achieved something remarkable. Father's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, to thank her. But the words felt heavy. As the evening went on, she came by often, not just to take orders, but to talk to the boy. She asked him questions, even though his replies were limited, and she listened as though his every sound carried meaning. She laughed with him, encouraged him, and when she noticed the father watching quietly, she gave him a reassuring smile, the kind that seemed to say, "He's wonderful, don't be afraid to see it." The billionaire shifted uncomfortably. For years he had been hiding behind his wealth, believing that money could make up for everything he lacked. But in the space of a few minutes, this woman had shown him something priceless, something his billions had never bought. He studied her closely when she walked back to the counter. Her steps were quick, almost hurried, balancing trays and plates. With practiced skill, yet every time she looked back at his son, her face softened, her eyes full of warmth. She was not pretending. This was who she was. And that realization unsettled him in ways he could not explain. His mind wandered as he sat there, his hands clasped tightly. He thought about the many times he had wanted to hold his son the way she had, to lift him without hesitation, to carry him not as a duty, but as an act of love. But he had always stopped himself, weighed down by fear, by the thought of how fragile his boy was, by the invisible wall he had built between them. Now, watching a stranger do it so naturally, he felt both admiration and shame. The boy was happier than he had been in weeks. He laughed, made little sounds of excitement, and his eyes followed the waitress every time she moved around the diner. The billionaire noticed how his son's face glowed with joy, how comfortable he looked, and he realized something painful. This simple moment, this ordinary act of kindness, was giving his son more happiness than all the expensive gifts and treatments he had ever arranged. For the rest of the meal, the father barely touched his food. He sat quietly, listening, watching, and feeling emotions rise inside him that he had long buried. Something was shifting. Something was breaking open in his chest, space he had kept locked for years. When the waitress finally returned with the bill, she didn't address him first. She bent down beside the boy again, tucking the napkin under his chin and patting his shoulder. "You did so well tonight," she whispered. "You're such a strong boy." The boy responded with a soft sound, and she kissed the top of his head lightly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The billionaire felt his eyes sting. He blinked quickly, trying to hide it. He wasn't a man who cried, not in public, not in front of strangers. But tonight, he was closer to it than he had ever been. As they prepared to leave, the waitress offered once more to help carry the boy. This time, the billionaire did not hesitate. He nodded, letting her take him in her arms again. She carried him outside, adjusting his position gently, whispering to him as though sharing a secret. The boy laughed softly, his head resting on her shoulder. The father followed, his heart heavy yet strangely light at the same time. For the first time in years, he felt that something had shifted in his world, though he could not yet define it. All he knew was that a simple waitress in a small diner had shown him a truth his wealth had blinded him to. And as he stood by the car, watching her carefully place his son back inside, he realized he would never forget this night. The billionaire could not sleep that night. Back at the hotel, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his son, who was resting peacefully after the long journey. The image of the waitress lifting his boy, as though it were the simplest thing in the world, kept replaying in his mind. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was just a small act of kindness, something anyone might have done. But deep inside, he knew there was something different about her. There had been no hesitation, no pity in her eyes, no discomfort in her voice. She had carried his son with the same natural love he had always wished to show but had never been able to. The next morning, when they set out on their journey again, he found himself thinking about the diner more than he expected. His business mind was restless, searching for reasons. Why had her actions unsettled him so much? Why did he feel drawn to understand more about her? It was not curiosity about her as a person of interest. It was more about the way she had treated his son. The way she had made him feel seen, not as someone broken, but as someone precious. That was a rare gift, one even money had not been able to buy. 2 days later, after finishing his meetings in the nearby city, he found himself giving his driver quiet instructions. Instead of heading straight for the airport, he asked to be taken back to the small town where the diner stood. His assistant was confused, but he gave no explanation. His son, sitting beside him, seemed unusually happy when he recognized the familiar road. His eyes lit up when they pulled up in front of the same little diner, as though he too was hoping to see the woman who had carried him. She was there just as before, moving quickly between tables, balancing trays, smiling at customers, even though her eyes showed signs of tiredness. Her uniform was clean but slightly worn, her shoes clearly old from constant use, and her hands bore the marks of long hours of work. Yet her presence filled the room with warmth. When she spotted them, her face lit up. She hurried over, her smile brighter, and she immediately leaned toward the boy, greeting him first. "Well, look who's back," she said softly. "Did you miss me?" The boy made a small sound of joy, his body shaking lightly in excitement. She laughed, and it was a genuine laugh. The kind that made people nearby glance over and smile without knowing why. The billionaire sat silently again, watching, letting the scene unfold. He had come back to observe her, to understand what it was that made her different. And slowly, the answers began to reveal themselves. It was not just her kindness. It was the fact that she carried her own burdens, yet still had the strength to lift others. Later that afternoon, when the diner grew quieter, they overheard two older women at a nearby table speaking about her. Spoke with admiration. One of them mentioned how she worked double shifts almost every week, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Another added how she never complained, even though life had not been fair to her. She was raising a child on her own, a little boy around the same age as his son, and her boy had medical needs too. The billionaire froze as he listened. His chest tightened. Could it be true? When she came back to their table, he finally asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. "You have a child?" She nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, a little boy. He's 7 now. The strongest little fighter I know." The billionaire glanced at his son, then back at her. "Is he healthy?" He felt guilty, asking, but something inside him needed to know. Her smile faltered slightly, but her eyes didn't lose their warmth. "He was born with complications. Doctors said he wouldn't live past his first year. But here he is, proving them wrong every single day." The billionaire was quiet. His throat felt dry. He realized then why her touch, her actions, had carried such depth. She understood. She knew the struggle, the pain, the endless fight between hope and despair. She had lived it herself, not with wealth and resources, but with nothing more than her own determination and love. She continued, speaking softly, almost as if she were sharing a secret. "I work here most days and nights. It's not easy, but I don't mind. Everything I do is for him. Every plate I serve, every hour I spend on my feet, it's all so I can keep him smiling, keep him alive, keep him believing the world is kind, even when it isn't." The billionaire felt something stir inside him. He had always believed that money was the greatest weapon against suffering. But here was a woman who had almost nothing, yet was still fighting the same battle he was, and somehow she was winning in ways he had failed. She did not hide from her child. She did not bury herself in excuses or distractions. She faced life head-on, with courage and tenderness. As she spoke more, he noticed how her face softened whenever she mentioned her son. Her eyes carried a mix of exhaustion and fierce pride. She did not complain about her struggles, nor did she ask for sympathy. She simply accepted her life as it was and gave everything she had for her boy. That kind of strength was rare, even among the powerful people he worked with daily. The boy in the booth listened to, tilting his head as if he understood. His own eyes followed her every movement, as though he felt a bond with her beyond words. And perhaps he did. Children often see truths adults overlook. The billionaire left the diner that day shaken. On the drive back, he could not stop thinking about her words. He thought of the nights she must have stayed awake, caring for her child. Alone, with no team of doctors, no expensive equipment, no private nurses. He imagined her working late, returning home with tired hands, yet still finding the energy to hold her son, to whisper stories, to assure him that everything would be okay. He compared it with his own life, where he had every advantage yet had. Failed to give his son the one thing she gave so freely, her heart. That night, in his hotel room, he lay awake for hours. His mind replayed the look on her face when she spoke of her son. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't sadness. It was love, fierce and unshakable. And he realized that was what had been missing from his own life. Not love itself, but the courage to show it without holding back. The next morning, he returned again. This time, he spoke to her more. He asked about her boy, about the things he loved, about what kept her going. She answered openly, never once sounding as though she pitied herself. Instead, she spoke of the little joys, how her son loved music, how he laughed at silly cartoons, how he smiled when she told him he was her hero. The billionaire listened, humbled. Each word she spoke was like a mirror reflecting his own failures. and his hidden potential. He began to see her not as just a waitress, but as a teacher, though she didn't know it. Her strength, her resilience, her compassion, all of it, was teaching him what it truly meant to be a parent. And as he left the diner once more, holding his son's hand a little tighter than before, he understood something with painful clarity. This woman, this waitress from a small town, was showing him a truth that all his money and all his power had never revealed. That love was not about what you could provide, but about how deeply you could give yourself. The billionaire found himself returning to the small town more often than he could have imagined. At first, he told himself it was simply to see the boy happy, to let his son enjoy the rare companionship of someone who seemed to understand him, in ways he himself often could not. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Each time he watched the waitress move around the diner, interacting with her own son and others with a calm strength and quiet joy, he felt a tug at his heart that was both unsettling and enlightening. She was no ordinary person. She carried burdens that would have broken others, yet she smiled, laughed, and loved with a bravery that astonished him. He started noticing the small details. The way she adjusted her son's chair so he could reach the table. The gentle way she brushed crumbs from his sleeves. The way she whispered encouragements when he struggled to finish his meal. Every action was deliberate, patient, and full of warmth. And it made him reflect painfully on how he had often tried to compensate for his son's needs with money and luxury rather than attention, understanding, and patience. The contrast was stark, and it began to gnaw at him. One afternoon, decided to stay longer in the diner, sitting in a corner booth. Where he could observe without drawing attention, he watched her interact with everyone who came in, her coworkers, regular customers, and strangers alike. She seemed to have a rhythm to her life, a natural flow that made everything look effortless, even though he knew it was far from easy. Her movements were precise, but gentle. She carried trays with care, knelt to talk to children with respect, and spoke to elderly patrons with warmth. It wasn't just her actions, it was the presence she brought with her, a combination of strength, kindness, and dignity that made every person feel seen. He started to realize that wealth and power had given him almost everything. Never taught him the simple truths about life that she embodied. Love, patience, sacrifice, and resilience. These were not things you could buy or command. They were lived and earned through struggle, through sleepless nights, and relentless care, through unwavering dedication in the face of hardship. And she had them in abundance, in ways that were raw, real, and unshakable. Curiosity began to turn into admiration, and admiration into respect. He found himself talking to her more, asking questions, not as a wealthy man trying to solve problems with money, but as a human being trying to understand the world she had built for her son. She spoke candidly about her life, the hardships, the fears, the small victories. She told him about the nights she stayed awake, holding her son as he cried from discomfort. The days she skipped meals to ensure he had enough. The endless appointments with doctors and specialists, and the constant worry that never left her heart. Yet she did not complain. She did not ask for sympathy. She simply shared her life, her truth, and in doing so, she revealed a depth of courage that shook him to the core. He also began to notice how her son thrived under her care. Unlike the pampered, protected children he often saw in his circles, her son had learned resilience, patience, and joy in ways that came naturally from the environment she created. He laughed freely, explored boldly, and trusted completely, not because life was easy, but because his mother had taught him that love could conquer fear. The billionaire realized that, despite his wealth and the best resources he could provide, he had overlooked the most crucial element: emotional presence, authentic connection, and unwavering support. Over the following weeks, he found his own son changing subtly. Serving the waitress, he began to interact with his child differently. He lingered longer at the table, listened more carefully, and encouraged rather than instructed. He saw the power of genuine attention, of being fully present, and he tried to emulate the lessons he was witnessing in the diner every day. And though his own efforts were awkward and clumsy at first, He noticed his son responding positively, his eyes lighting up, his laughter becoming freer, his confidence slowly growing. The billionaire also started to involve himself in the small joys of the waitress's life, though cautiously. He offered little gestures of help, covering a medical bill anonymously, providing supplies for her son's therapy, but always in a way that respected her dignity. She did not treat him as a benefactor, nor did she accept his generosity with any sense of entitlement. Instead, she acknowledged it with quiet gratitude, nodding and smiling, never letting the gift overshadow the hard work she had done to reach this point on her own. As their bond grew, he began to see the ripple effect of her character in the community around her. Customers who came to the diner repeatedly spoke of her integrity and compassion. Coworkers admired her dedication, and even strangers were touched by her willingness to help without hesitation. It became clear that her strength did not lie solely in her motherly care, but in the way she lived her life with a consistent, quiet courage that inspired everyone around her. One rainy evening, he stayed later than usual. The diner had emptied, leaving only a few regulars. He watched her kneel to help her son with homework, her fingers brushing his hair back, her voice patient and encouraging. In that simple act, he saw the embodiment of love as he had never known it. It was not flashy, it was not rewarded, and it was not done for recognition. It was pure, undiluted, and transformative. The billionaire realized that she had done what he had failed to do for so long. She had created a safe space for her child, nurtured him through every challenge, and built a foundation of trust and love that no wealth could replace. Her resilience was not just survival, it was flourishing despite hardship, and it illuminated the shortcomings in his own approach to fatherhood. He also began reflecting on his own life and relationships. He saw how he had often measured success through status, power, and possessions, while ignoring the emotional and spiritual dimensions of life that truly mattered. The waitress's life, though materially modest, was rich in ways he had never experienced: triching love, compassion, and unwavering human connection. Her strength was teaching him humility, and her dedication was inspiring him to reassess his priorities. During these visits, he started to engage more personally with the waitress, not as a wealthy man or a potential savior, but as someone who genuinely wanted to learn from her. They shared conversations about dreams, fears, and experiences, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with quiet contemplation. He discovered layers to her personality beyond motherhood: her subtle humor, her resilience, her wisdom drawn from struggle. Every moment with her challenged his assumptions, expanded his perspective, and deepened his understanding of what it meant to live a meaningful life. The billionaire also noticed changes within himself. He was more patient, more attentive, more willing to listen without rushing to solve problems with money or influence. His empathy grew, not artificially, but organically, as he observed the consistency of her character and the unconditional nature of her love. He started to understand that leadership and power were not solely about decisions and authority, they were also about care, responsibility, and presence. One day, as he helped clear tables after a busy lunch hour, he realized how much he had internalized her lessons. He found himself instinctively noticing small needs-lifting chairs, adjusting napkins, smiling at a child who seemed lost, offering encouragement without prompting. It was remarkable how quickly her example had reshaped him, and he marveled at the subtle, transformative power of genuine kindness. The billionaire also saw that his son's joy was increasingly tied to these moments. He watched his boy laughing freely with the waitress's son, sharing toys, helping each other, learning from one another. The connection was organic, spontaneous, filled with a sense of mutual understanding and trust that transcended wealth, privilege, or circumstance. It was pure human connection, the kind that shapes character and builds confidence in ways no school or toy could replicate. He began to understand the extraordinary impact of seemingly small acts of kindness. The waitress had lifted his son once, and that act had rippled into a series of changes: his son's happiness, his own self-awareness, and a deeper appreciation for life. Every gesture, every smile, every moment of patience mattered. Her life was a testament to the fact that real power lay not in accumulation but in giving, not in status but in presence, not in wealth but in love. As weeks turned into months, he realized he had entered a new chapter in his own life. He approached fatherhood differently, engaged with people more genuinely, and even began reevaluating his priorities in business and personal relationships. The waitress's influence had become a quiet, steady force that reshaped his worldview. He understood that true richness was not monetary, but emotional and moral. Even as he continued to live in a world of luxury and influence, he carried with him the lessons he had learned at the small diner in the town that had once seemed insignificant. He carried them in the way he touched his son's life, in the way he approached relationships, in the humility and gratitude that had slowly replaced arrogance and entitlement. And he realized that she, without ever seeking it, had become a guiding force, an unexpected mentor whose strength, love, and resilience had transformed him from within. The seasons changed, and with them, Billionaire noticed more profound changes within his own life and in the life of his son. The boy, once hesitant, withdrawn, and fearful of new experiences, began to bloom in ways that seemed almost miraculous. To him, every day at the diner became a lesson, not just for his son, but for himself as well. The once distant, sometimes cold figure of a father had begun to learn the language of love that could not be bought. He realized that the small, consistent gestures of care, the gentle encouragement, shared laughter, the patience in teaching, were more powerful than any wealth he could have offered. He watched closely as the waitress continued to navigate the challenges of her life with unwavering grace. She balanced work, family, and her own personal struggles with a resilience that astonished him. Even on days when exhaustion threatened to overtake her, she managed to bring joy and attention to her son and to those around her. The billionaire came to understand that what he had perceived as ordinary courage was, in reality, extraordinary. Each day she demonstrated an unspoken philosophy that love, consistency, and empathy could reshape the world around her, beginning with the lives closest to her heart. The billionaire started applying these lessons beyond the walls of the diner. At home, he spent more time with his son in ways he had never done before, reading stories with him, helping with homework, and even playing games without distractions. He learned to celebrate small victories, to notice little triumphs, and to offer praise and reassurance in ways that were authentic and meaningful. His son, in turn, responded with a newfound confidence, exploring the world with curiosity and joy rather than trepidation. These transformations, subtle at first, grew more visible with each passing day. Reflecting the profound impact of patient love and presence, he also began to form a bond with the waitress that went beyond casual friendship or gratitude. He respected her as a person, admiring her strength, intelligence, and determination. Conversations that once revolved around small talk now delved into life philosophies, dreams, and the future. She shared her hopes for her son, her worries, and her aspirations, and he listened with genuine interest, learning from her insights and understanding her perspective. In doing so, he discovered the importance of humility, not as a sign of weakness, but as an essential trait for genuine growth and connection. The billionaire also reflected deeply on his own past behavior and mistakes. He realized that wealth and influence had often blinded him to the simpler, more profound truths of life. He had tried to compensate for emotional distance with gifts, experiences, and opportunities, believing that these could replace the need for genuine attention and care. Watching the waitress's unwavering dedication and witnessing the authentic joy in her son's life made him confront the limitations of this mindset. True parenting, he understood, was about presence, patience, and unconditional love. Prestige, power, or wealth. Over time, the bond between the two families grew stronger. The boys became inseparable friends, learning from each other, laughing together, supporting one another through challenges. Their shared experiences became a bridge between their worlds, the privileged life of the billionaire's son and the modest, yet rich, upbringing of the waitress's child. Through this friendship, the billionaire saw his own son developing empathy. resilience, and gratitude, qualities that he had hoped to instill but had struggled to nurture until now. He also observed the ripple effects of the waitress's influence on the larger community. Her integrity, kindness, and unwavering dedication had earned her admiration and respect from everyone she encountered. Customers spoke of her with warmth, colleagues sought her guidance, and neighbors appreciated her willingness to help without expecting anything in return. Her life, though unassuming, had created a web of positive impact, touching lives far beyond her immediate circle. Witnessing this, the billionaire realized that the true measure of success was not in wealth or recognition, but in the ability to uplift and inspire others through consistent acts of compassion. Motivated by these lessons, he began to rethink his approach to business and philanthropy. No longer satisfied with simply donating money or funding large projects, he sought ways to make a meaningful personal impact. He became more involved in charitable initiatives that prioritized hands-on engagement. Understanding the importance of connecting with people on a human level rather than treating philanthropy as a transaction, this shift in perspective brought him fulfillment that his previous life of opulence and influence had never provided. The billionaire also learned to embrace vulnerability. In the presence of the waitress, he found the courage to admit his mistakes, acknowledge his shortcomings, and confront the emotional barriers that had long kept him from forming deep, authentic connections. He realized that strength was not about always having answers or solutions, but about being willing to learn, to listen, and to grow. This vulnerability allowed him to become a more compassionate father, a more empathetic friend, and a more thoughtful human being. As the years passed, the transformations became even more profound. His son, now growing into adolescence, carried within him the lessons of patience, resilience, and empathy. The influence of the waitress, combined with his father's renewed presence, created a foundation of confidence and emotional intelligence that could not be shaken by privilege or circumstance. He learned to navigate challenges with courage, to value relationships over material gain, and to approach life with both humility and determination. The billionaire's own life continued to evolve in parallel. He discovered joy in simplicity, finding fulfillment in small moments rather than grand displays of wealth. Meals shared with family, quiet conversations, and moments of shared laughter became treasures he cherished more than any luxury he had once pursued. He understood that happiness was not a product of money or status, but a reflection of the depth of connection, the authenticity of relationships, and the consistency of care and attention given to those he loved. The waitress, meanwhile, continued to navigate her own journey with the same quiet strength that had first captured his admiration. She faced challenges as any parent would, but now, with the billionaire's support, she experienced a different kind of relief, one that did not compromise her independence or dignity. Her life remained a testament to resilience, love, and unwavering dedication. And through her influence, both families were irrevocably changed for the better. The billionaire often reflected on the pivotal moment when he had first seen the waitress lift his son. That single act of kindness had set in motion a series of events that transformed his understanding of life, parenting, and human connection. It reminded him that the most powerful lessons often come from unexpected sources, and that true greatness is measured not by what one possesses, but by the impact one has on the lives of others. In time, the two families became intertwined in ways that went beyond friendship. Shared experiences, mutual respect, and deep emotional bonds created a support system that strengthened both children and adults alike. Each person contributed to the growth and well-being of the others, and together they cultivated an environment where love, resilience, and empathy thrived. The billionaire saw that wealth and privilege could coexist with humility and compassion, but only when guided by the lessons he had learned from the waitress. Ultimately, the story became one of transformation, not just for the son or the billionaire, but for all involved. It was a testament to the enduring power of kindness, patience, and genuine human connection. The waitress, through her daily acts of love and courage, had altered the trajectory of lives in ways that money alone never could. And the billionaire, once distant and preoccupied with status, had discovered the profound fulfillment that comes from being present, engaged and genuinely connected with those he loved. He understood that life's true richness was measured, not by possessions or accolades, but by the depth of the relationships one cultivates, the compassion one demonstrates, and the positive influence one has on the world around them. Through witnessing her strength and learning from her example, he became a better father, a better human being, and a more conscious participant in the lives he touched. The lessons of love, empathy, and resilience were now embedded in the fabric of his daily life, guiding his actions, shaping his priorities, and inspiring him to live with intention and care. By the end, it was clear that the initial act, the waitress lifting his son, had been far more than a single moment of assistance. It was the spark that ignited profound change, illuminating the path toward deeper understanding, authentic relationships, and a life enriched by compassion and presence. The billionaire had learned that the most transformative experiences often arise from humility, observation, and the willingness to embrace lessons offered by others. And so, the lives of the two families continued, intertwined and enriched, a testament to the extraordinary impact that one act of kindness and one remarkable person could have on the course of many lives. Through love, patience, and unwavering dedication, they demonstrated the enduring power of human connection, proving that true wealth lies not in what one has, but in how one touches the lives of others.